Boop. Happy Thursday. Today's Thursday, July 23rd, 2020. And we're back for another installment of Wesley's Daily Bible Readings. And today's Daily Bible Readings, come to us through Psalm 105, 1 through 11, and verse 45. Genesis 29, 1 through 8, 1 Corinthians 4, 14 through 20. Or you could have read Psalm 119, 129 through 136, or 1 Kings 128 through chapter 1, 28 through verse 37, and then once again 1 Corinthians. Today I'm going to focus on the section from 1 Kings chapter 1, 28 through 37, and it's interesting because this talks about David, but not the David that we've come to know and love, right? Whenever we think of King David, we think of, we tend to think of the young, heroic king, the man, I guess the boy who would be king, right? The young, heroic boy who, is called in from tending his father's sheep to be anointed king by Samuel, the guy who, the young man who's so full of faith in the God of Israel that he takes on this giant because, he knows that God's going to be with him. The guy that Saul liked to throw spears at, because darts. Anyway, that's when we think of King David, that's the guy we think of, the guy who took control of Israel and beat the Philistines up and all this good stuff. We don't really ever think about David as a tired old man, right? David had a long reign, and he ended up turning into a tired old king who probably wasn't really paying as close attention as he should have to things, and that's where we find ourselves at 1 Kings 1:28 through 37. Actually, basically that whole first chapter of Kings is about this tired old man. And it sets the stage really right off. It's the part of that first chapter that we don't get to read today. You can go back and read it yourself. No reason why you can't. But we're told that David is lying in bed, right? He's so old and so tired and so weak, he can't even keep himself warm. Like, they have to go out and find this young girl to just lay in bed with him just to keep him warm. And we're told, there was no hanky-panky. The writer makes it very important that we know that she was mainly there. She was just there to keep his body temperature up, right? She was like a human water bottle, right? And so, this is the kind of man that David has become. And then it starts talking about his son Adonijah, who were said, in the midst of this, sees his chance to control power. And he comes up with this plan. And it's a pretty brilliant plan because he realizes his dad's old and weak and hasn't named a successor publicly. So he's, in line for the throne. So, hey, why not? And what he does is he throws this big, huge backyard barbecue, in the finest tradition of politicking. And he invites all of the power brokers in the land to come hang out in his backyard with him and basically pronounce him king. He basically says to this party, hey, I'm the new king, right? And Nathan later on, the prophet Nathan, tells us that he did this and, even had all the generals of the army there, right? So all the big power brokers, except he doesn't invite Nathan, the prophet of Israel, the guy who was, had the king's ear all the time and was the mouthpiece of God. He didn't invite Zadok the priest, the high priest of Israel, and he definitely didn't invite his brother Solomon. And so he does all this and is trying to consolidate power in the midst of his dad's elderly weakness, and also he does it without David's knowledge, but that's not really surprising. It's not like he had to sneak around much because apparently David had never really paid much attention to what he did. And we're told that in verse 6, and this is, I'm going to read this from the Contemporary English Bible. He says, it puts it this way: his father had never given him direction, right? So Adonijah had always done whatever he wanted to, basically, is what we're being told. And his dad didn't seem to care, so why not just do what he wanted now, and just take the throne? I mean, let me talk about it this way. This is a real problem that David has. This isn't just a lapse of judgment at this time with King David. This is just kind of the way David handled his sons and his family, to an extent, kind of the way he handled his own life. So once again, that verse, 1 Kings 1 verse 6, says, "Now Adonijah's father had never given him direction. He had never questioned why Adonijah did what he did." Right? The New Jerusalem Bible puts it this way: never once in his life had his father crossed him by saying, "Why are you behaving like that?" So you get this image of this dad who just didn't really pay attention to what his kids were doing, and just never questioned what, never made them give an account for their actions, their judgments, things like that. Now, it's not just this one case with this one son. Do you remember the story of Amnon and Absalom? Two of his sons by two of his wives. That is a whole horror story that you should look up, because he wasn't paying attention there either. Didn't really seem to want to get involved, didn't want to cross either of those sons, and it very nearly cost him the kingdom, because Absalom in the end ended up actually taking the kingdom away from him. So this is the history that David has, this tired old man who is still on the throne, or at least in his bed. And the rest of this chapter gives us this image of, first, as when Bathsheba, Solomon's mom, gets wind of this, and, she comes to David and is like, "Hey, you promised, you vowed that Solomon would be king." And then Nathan comes in and says, "Hey, did you know what your son is up to? Did you know about this barbecue? And by the way, he didn't invite me, he didn't invite the priest, and he sure as heck didn't invite your son Solomon." And David, I think, starts having flashbacks to everything that had happened with Absalom and all the traumas about that. And so he decides right then and there to declare Solomon king in a very public and very profound way. And he tells Nathan to go and anoint him, and basically does it in the midst of all the people. And he's not saying him, like, making a public pronouncement saying, "When I die, Solomon will be king." No, he's making him king now, even though David is still alive. He's putting his son Solomon on the throne immediately. And we're told at the end of this chapter that his son Adonijah trembles with fear. He goes and latches onto the altar, the horns of the altar, and makes his brother vow that he will not kill him, because this is the thing. Bathsheba was very frightened for her safety and her son's safety, and rightly so, because that's what Adonijah would have done to consolidate his power, to this transition of power he was trying to work out. In the end, it doesn't work well for him, for this son of David, even after Solomon takes power, and even after David's gone. I think after David's gone, Solomon just has enough of him and just gets rid of him. So, we have our heroes that we hold up, and we think that they're always wonderful and always powerful. But one of the things the Bible does is it doesn't let us live under this delusion that human beings are always so perfect and always so powerful. We are flawed creatures, and we live with our flaws. And we have to be careful that our flaws don't kind of forecast our future. So anyway, that's a really kind of, I guess, strange little investigation into the political world that was the kingdom of King David, that tired old king. But anyway, we'll be back tomorrow with another daily Bible reading, and you have a good evening. Boop.